Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the 2025 rookie class. Welcome into the Devy Devotional. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox 86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to be diving into the 2025 class. Sorry if it's a little confusing with the overlay because it says C2C sleepers. I was confused about what we were doing tonight, and I created the overlay. And so, we'll have some sleepers. I don't know if it's going to be quite as in depth as maybe that or should be, but I think that's what we're going to maybe do for the next pod. Aaron wanted to devote an entire podcast to that and not just split it up, rush things, do all that kind of stuff. So let's give the 2025 class what it deserves, the time that it deserves, and then we'll do the same thing with the C2C sleepers because I had a pretty long list. I'm sure Aaron probably does as well. And we're actually going to be getting into a C2C startup here pretty soon. So we'll need some of those sleepers to go ahead and win the league and everything. But before we dive into the 2025 class, how are you doing tonight, Aaron?
Good. Yeah. And I totally agree that this 2025 class, there are a lot of names that deserve our attention and that we'll discuss tonight. So certainly can set aside a little bit deeper sleepers or guys who are a little bit more fantasy football friendly on the college side, let's say, for the C2C leagues. So we'll do that another day here. But yes, let's get into some of these Devy players, some of these upcoming guys in the 2025 draft class. We just got through the cycle of the NFL draft, and now a lot of rookie drafts have taken place in dynasty leagues. And it's been really fun to see kind of where these guys settle in from the 2024 class. I really want to see what this next class shapes up to be like. I mean, it's exciting. It's much different, though, I will say, than the 2024 class. That's for sure.
Absolutely. We got a couple people in the chat. Andy Starr, my co-host from the Devy University podcast, was first in line. And he's also grabbing his notepad. And then I think I've heard of this guy before. Felix Sharp says, great show, Aaron, and co-host. I think that Felix is from the second best Devy pod at campus2can.com, right? If I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure I don't really remember. I mean, he's got terrible audio, so I can never really hear what he's saying anyway. So who knows?
And then we got Toronto Dave in the chat, in Beth we trust, and go Wolves, bring your ass, Toronto Dave, and let's go. Love me some Wolves. I was at the game 6, the facing elimination one at home for the Wolves, and it was just incredible. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, I'm sure any kind of elimination games are always got to be fun. And but yeah, who knew that you were a basketball fan as well? But here we are. So let's go ahead and dive into the 2025 class. A very ambiguous class is probably one of the easiest or best ways to describe it because, I think I've said it before, but, like if you ask 10 different Devy analysts who their top 10 players are, you're going to get a list of probably 10 different lists, 10 different orders and everything. And that's probably pretty normal this time of year, but I think it's a little worse this time of year or this year in general, just because there's so many or so few proven players, I should say. And so I think that, it's good to dive into it and actually figure out, okay, who are the players and how likely are they to hit? Because, this time last year, we had people talking about AD Mitchell as possibly somebody that could hit and this and that. Obviously that was a kind of a roller coaster in its own right, and we have very similar things going on this year with, even going to the same school, Isaiah Bond, is he going to do something very similar to what AD Mitchell did, value wise, that kind of thing. So we'll have to dive into all these players and figure out who the hell is going to hit in this class. And Hollywood says, you guys are killing it. Keep up the great work. We appreciate you, buddy. So, Aaron, you want to go ahead and start us out here? I guess, who do you want to start with? You want to start with the QBs? Because that's normally the fun part, but I say it might not be the fun part in this class.
Might as well just since you mentioned it, and honestly, yeah, we might not spend as much time on this segment as some years because we're kind of spoiled coming off a class that has Caleb Williams, and then you got Drake May and Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy, and maybe if you're kind of a weirdo, you like Bo Nix or Penix or something. But honestly, we had just an abundance of quarterback prospects this year, and then it's not going to be necessarily like that next year. Not the same quality as a Caleb Williams type of prospect, and not nearly the depth, at least at this time. So I don't see, 3, 4, 5 guys jumping into that early first round category, but there might be a few. And I think right off the top, you got to talk about Carson Beck, Georgia quarterback. He is at least, a safe-ish quarterback, and he's getting a lot of talk right now as the QB1 in the class. I'm curious if you agree with that, if you've come around to that idea. I know you've been on him for quite a while, John. But there's also another guy I know that you like in this class as well.
Yeah, I can't really get somebody's crying. Hopefully everyone's okay. I can't really get behind the Carson Beck at QB1, but it's close enough to where it's not impossible or anything like that. Like players take steps forward all the time. I just don't have him as QB1 right now. In fact, I actually have him a tier break below. But I only have two tier one, or actually I don't have a single tier one quarterback in this class right now. I have two tier two QBs, and then I have two tier three QBs, and that's where we'll find Carson Beck. So like I technically have him a tier below, but I mean it's a pretty like mini tier break. So I'm kind of like being more like drawing an arbitrary line more than anything else. He's up there for sure. But I wanted to ask you. I was actually thinking about this earlier while I was working. Do you think it's getting to the point where Carson Beck is maybe a little overvalued because people are pushing him up to QB1 in the class? And like I said, I'm not going to sit here and truly argue with you about it, but I even in that QB1, because he's QB1 in air quotes, I think people are like pushing him up and being like, okay, now he's uber valuable. And so I'm starting to wonder, even like I have him in our in one of our C2C leagues. I'm starting to wonder, do I need to sell him? Like maybe I should have done this before we started talking about it tonight, but it just seems like getting that QB1 moniker has made him more valuable than he probably should be, because like I like the player, but he has some flaws that he needs to work on as well.
Yeah, right. I mean, just because he's a QB1, like you said, shouldn't vault him into uh, big time asset categories. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, he's safe, but that I just don't think is going to make him a great fantasy quarterback at the NFL level either. And that's kind of what we're shooting for. We want that high end outcome. So even if he comes out of the class and he's like, I've heard the comp thrown out there, like a Matt Ryan type of guy. I mean, that's probably the ceiling, right? And if we're seeing more of the median outcome or maybe a lower end outcome from that, that's not very exciting for your fantasy teams. I'm not saying it's bad, but there's also an outcome where he's just not a good NFL quarterback either if he just doesn't quite make the strides that he needs to, or something happens. But yeah, at the end of the day, safe. But I do think that he's starting to become overvalued. I would agree with you. It's just that this murky class in general is another reason why I think his value is kind of creeping up there, because there's some safety associated with it, where there is plenty of risk there at some of these running backs, some of these wide receivers, and really not a whole lot of proven talent quite yet at the tight end position either.
Yeah, I'm glad you agree with me, because I wasn't sure. I know you've definitely gotten more on board with Beck since last year when you made fun of me for drafting him in the third round of a supplemental draft. Since then, you've come around a little bit, but I did. Like now he's going for first, and I don't mind that. I'm not saying that's a bad price, but I'm almost willing to sell him for a first and just re-roll, even though like I get that there's safety with Beck. But like I'm almost willing to just sell, because like you said, I don't know if the upside is quite there. If anything, I feel like he relied a lot on Brock Bowers, And I don't think that's like all that all that crazy to say. And you see it when like his intended air yards are a little lower than you'd like him to be. His big time throw rate's a little lower than you'd like it to be. It's just like the big plays weren't really there. Now that could change this year, and maybe it will, because he doesn't have that Brock Bowers safety blanket anymore. And like they have some big play guys like a London Humphreys. Dominic Lovett kind of came around and towards the end of the second half of the season last year. So maybe he kind of takes a step forward this year, second year in the offense, things like that. I'm not saying he doesn't have pieces around him, or that I, once again, that I don't like him. I just wonder about like the actual ceiling that's going to be there. And so I kind of am willing to re-roll if you can get that first, especially knowing that I spent a third. Not that you should always get out just because you spent a third or whatever, but having that in the back of your mind doesn't hurt anything either.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is that re-rolling, those hit rates are also pretty low there too. So I'm willing just to hold them if I do have them, and if you do have to spend up for them. I mean, I don't hate it in this landscape, but just know that, just because he's a QB1 does not mean like he's anywhere near where like a Caleb Williams or even like a Drake May were this last year when they were in that QB1 conversation and or being valued as a top end Devy asset. But let's go ahead and kind of reveal a couple other names there. John, would you be able to give us a few?
Absolutely. So I mentioned I had two players in my tier one, and the first one here on the list is Jackson Dart, and I think I've been the guy on Jackson Dart for at least a year now, and nothing's changed. I mean, I feel like he has taken the biggest step forward of any quarterback in football, in college football, within the last year. He has proven the most within the last year, and yet I don't. And even if I listen to CFF pods from C2C and everything, they're all talking about how he's going to have this amazing CFF year. I'm like, all right, so if he's already up there, he's already proven himself, and he's already taken a step forward. He's gotten better. He got rid of the interceptions. He kind of took that part out of the game. He's athletic. He can run. And he's going to take a step forward this year. Like, why is he not our QB1 for everyone? I really don't get it. I'm not saying he's like leaps and bounds above everyone else. Like I said, he's not even in a tier one for me. He's extremely close to being in tier one, but he's not. And so I can't say that like I love him, like have to have him on my team, but I am saying, especially when you consider the price and the ADP where you're able to get him, now I am in love, and I do want him on my team. So, I mean, if I have to take him at 101 overall in a startup, okay, that's pushing it a little bit, but you're able to get him at like I don't even like the third, fourth round sometimes. Like it's crazy, and I just don't think he's getting the respect he deserves.
Yeah, you're certainly right that he deserves more respect. And, Felix was in the chat here, from Campus to Canton, and we put out a podcast on Campus to Canton Live. And he was a player that I highlighted, Jackson Dart, just as kind of that breakout sleeper. And at this point, I mean, sleeper is not really the right term because he is still being regarded as a higher end quarterback in this class. But the issue is that there's just so much uncertainty with this class that he doesn't always get enough talk. So I know both you and I have been very complimentary of Darts, definitely, in this process, especially coming into the season, like as a guy who could be potentially top. I have him top 2 in this class. I don't necessarily have him ahead of Beck yet at this time. That could easily flip. It's not like I have them in different tiers or anything. For me, I have them close. So Jackson Dart is very much set up for success this year at Ole Miss. You said that you had another player up top here, though. I am intrigued because I don't have anybody in the same tier as the Carson Beck and Jackson Dart at this time in this class.
So he's a little younger. He's a little more, or a little less proven, I should say. But he has definitely flashed, and it's Connor Wegman. And the injury last year kind of killed him taking a step forward, unfortunately. And maybe even in this offseason, he's not 100% healthy. He's not really running around doing everything he should be doing. So it could even be a slow start to the year. But I do believe in his talent. I guess the question mark is going to be, does he decide to stay for a fourth year because of all the question marks and everything? But that's not really going to change my mind on him. It's just going to be, does the play continue? So, I mean, I don't really care if he stays another year. Obviously, we're talking about the 2025 class. He can come out this year, but I guess if you like maybe decide today, I would probably say I'd lean towards him not coming out. But I mean, all he has to do is put a good season together, and he could easily do it. He could come out this year. So I love the talent. Everything has looked pretty good. Obviously, love the athleticism that he puts out there. You want to talk about like a player with upside. Connor Wegman is absolutely that, and that's another reason why he's up there in that tier 2 for me, because there's only so many players that are even remotely close to what he's done so far that have that athleticism and everything that he has, the talent, the skills, all the arm strength, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I love me some Wegman. He's actually he's technically my QB1, but it's just he's fairly unproven. So it's tough to be like, oh man, I love Wegman, but that's what this 2025 class is going to be. It's like, I really like this guy. I don't know if I love him.
Yeah, and I really do like the upside of Wegman, and he is, in my Devy ranks, he's actually QB4, but I just don't quite have him in that tier with those couple of top guys. I know it's being nitpicky, right? He certainly has the ability to leapfrog those guys, jump up into that tier and seize that number 1 position, because as we've been saying, it's not that solidified. So Connor Wegman just has such fun. I mean, he has good mobility, but his arm talent is awesome. It's just that we really haven't seen much of him yet in college, unfortunately, just due to injury. But still, the injury happened, and that's really stalled his development. So he'll need a huge, consistent year at Texas A&M. I don't really know, with them losing their best wide receiver talent there, I'm not really sure exactly what that offense is going to amount to this season. I think there is potential, like you said, for him to stay another year. So I like the Wigman call out there. It's certainly a lot of upside with them. Just, tough to, of course, say it's guaranteed at this point. That's for sure. But some other people might be surprised that we're not talking about like a Quinn Ewers or a Shedeur Sanders here amongst quarterbacks. I am not. I don't have those guys near this level. That's another teardrop below. Do you have anybody who's near this level of these first 3 guys, Carson Beck, Jackson Dart, or Connor Wigman?
So I actually have Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck exactly tied in Beth
Okay.
and Devy Beth. So I always I've been joking for a couple of years now how I hate Quinn Ewers, and it's just hilarious that like he's my QB4. It's like it's just absolutely hilarious. But once again, that shows you what the class is like. Like I don't like, normally I would probably be like, oh man, like there's 5 or 6 guys that I think could be this or that or whatever. And I mean, I'm really saying like I think there's 2. There might be 1 guy that like I truly believe in, and that would be Jackson Dart. That like I really think by the end of the season he's going to be a first round pick, maybe a back end first round pick, whatever. But I feel like he's going to be a first round pick in the NFL draft. I feel pretty strongly about that. I can't really say that I feel strongly about anyone else being in that first round. Now, I'm not saying that won't happen. Obviously, we've seen the NFL do some idiotic things, especially a couple of guys in the first round this year. So I think that other people can creep into it. And I think Quinn Ewers has done enough that he could be a first round pick. Do I think he really deserves it right now? No, not necessarily. Like he hasn't been able to prove that he actually has a deep ball, which is hilarious because I hear other people, and you know me, I'm not a film guy, so maybe you can clarify this for me. I hear other people talking about Quinn Ewers, and they say how he has a crazy strong arm, and yet he is just absolutely terrible with his deep ball. So I mean, is it just like an inaccurate thing, or or these people may be a little mistaken about this strong arm that he has?
Yeah, I don't think his arm is necessarily otherworldly. It was probably a little bit overstated coming out of high school, just how great of an arm he had, and then people have kind of hung on to that. And at the end of the day, it's just the inconsistency as a passer too that maybe makes you think maybe he doesn't have this great of arm talent, great of control with his throws, and certainly some of the anticipatory aspects of his game as a passer, that's lacking at this time. I saw him, he missed some guys out there like A.D. Mitchell and at times Xavier Worthy just by kind of underthrowing them or just timing it really poorly. And I get A.D. Mitchell kind of, he runs his route sometimes really fast and snappy and sometimes slow. And Worthy, smaller target, whatever. But at the end of the day, you got to hit those guys. And Quinn Ewers at times was inconsistent doing so. So that's why I don't quite have him at this level. But I certainly like Ewers more than I like Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is just a guy at Colorado who, tale of two seasons, but really a lot of it has to do with some of the competition he played early on. They fired the offensive coordinator, and you saw how that offense just kind of sputtered out, and he took a ton of sacks. I get the offensive line at Colorado was poor, but at the end of the day, like Shedeur, you can't be doing that. And he didn't show great mobility either. So if you're banking on him being some sort of a dual threat type of guy, like a entertaining Konami code type of quarterback who's going to rush for a lot of yards, you're going to be mistaken. That's just not his game, not at the college level, and not going to be that way at the pro level for Shedeur Sanders. I just don't have a lot of faith in him right now. However, I do have a share in a Campus to Canton league. So if you're listening to this, maybe tune out what I just said and shoot me an offer, because Shedeur Sanders is being thrown out there as maybe a top, 2-3 quarterback in this class by some. I think it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have Shedeur and Jalen Milroe pretty close to each other. Another guy in this class, obviously. Actually, I have them back to back, and it's for different reasons. They're maybe you can find some similarities to them, but like they're really different players. And I would say that like I have Jalen Milroe one spot ahead, but he is ahead of him, and I want to see if their grades are all that different. No, not really. So I can't say that they're all that different, but you see a little more of the upside with Jalen Milroe. He has he's pushing the ball down the field when he's doing it. Maybe he's obviously not throwing as much as like a Shedeur is, but Shedeur is barely throwing it down the field. He's throwing at 8.5 yards per intended air yards per play. 5% big time throw rate, which is fine. It's like the minimum threshold that I'm looking for. But you're in the Pac-12. You're at Colorado doing that. Like, I don't want fine in the Pac-12. I want you to be damn good in the Pac-12. And when you're pushing the ball down the field 8.5 yards, that's not cutting it. 8.4 yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt for him in the Pac-12. Once again, like that's not going to cut it. So I would say that I would give Jalen Milroe a much higher chance of like doing something in the NFL. But like you said, that's not the consensus right now. Like it's like, oh, Shedeur Sanders is this top 5 guy, and Jalen Milroe is some project that could be, something, or probably, just kind of being left off of rankings and things like that. So I don't really understand beyond the Dion and Colorado bump that he's getting. I don't really get why Shedeur is getting this boost. I really feel like, if anything, Jalen Milroe, the Alabama guy who has basically solidified having this job, even though like we didn't really believe in him or anything like that. And a lot of people didn't believe in him. And even I thought he might lose his job last year, and he didn't. So, at this point, now he's getting another year under center. Yes, it's a new, it's a new scheme, a new offense and everything. But I think when it's all said and done, if you can take a Shedeur Sanders in Devy and C2C, whatever, and trade him for Jalen Milroe straight up, I would do that.
Yeah. I don't know about any wheeze here. I liked Jalen Milroe last year. I thought he would hold the job down. And
you did, but you had some doubts with Simpson, right? Ty Simpson. You thought he might take over at some point.
Yeah, no, I liked Ty coming out for sure, but as far as quarterbacks go for Bama, it's like, and especially what they were looking for to hopefully win games, Jalen Milroe does that, and I think that's the exciting part of him, is that he can be involved as a rusher, and he can really help out a team there when the passing game isn't necessarily clicking. But that's also the concern with him, is that the passing game does not always click when Jalen Milroe's in there, and at the end of the day, I think we're talking about him here because of the wide open quarterback class, just kind of the way it is right now. But if you're talking about a guy who has the rushing upside of an Anthony Richardson, of a Jalen Hurts, of I don't know if we can say like a Lamar Jackson, that seems kind of taboo, but at the end of the day, Jalen Milroe gives you some of the best rushing threat, plus some arm strength and all that that you're going to get out of this class. So he's not like a Joe Milton type of guy. He's much more talented on the ground. It's not just about the arm, and he's not that talented arm strength wise either. I'm just saying that there is a lot of Jalen Milroe's game, I guess, to like. It's just he needs to continue to develop as a passer. And that was where my reservations, of course, came in last year. It's like he just needed to take that next step. But I'm a big advocate for guys. They get better as the years go on, typically. Like these quarterbacks, they tend to creep up in completion percentage, in average yards per pass attempt. And, those types of statistics tend to creep up as long as the situation around them doesn't crater as they get into the third, fourth year of their college careers.
Yeah, and I think that's why. I mean, I have both of them a tier below your Quinn Ewers, your Carson Beck, all that. But they're right there where it's like if they did take a step forward, they could be in that mix. And I would rather bet on Milroe, but Sanders is not far behind him, so I don't hate that either. And then another player that is kind of lost in the mix. I don't think people know how to rank this guy, and I kind of struggle with it too because I'd say I said that Jackson Dart is the most proven player. I would say that Dylan Gabriel is the actual most proven player in this class. And yet, he's going to be a 6th-year player, which obviously we don't love, but we just saw a 6th-year player get drafted. So, like in very early. So I guess the president has been set at this point, and, like we should probably at least keep him in the back of our minds. But I feel like a lot of people are just completely giving up on Dylan Gabriel. But if you took away his height and weight and looked at his numbers, you would go, oh my God, like I need to draft this guy like now. I need to have this guy on my team. The problem is he's listed as like 6 foot 200. People have told me that have watched him play. He's not 6 foot. Like that would be very, very generous. And I'm not arguing with them. Maybe he's 5'10". I have no idea. I don't truly care though, especially once again, it's another player that with the price that you're paying for him, I don't even care. Like if I had to pay QB2 prices for him or something like that, then sure, maybe I'm going to sit there and question, okay, is he 6 foot, like that kind of thing. But you can probably get Dylan Gabriel at like QB 15 or something like that, or at least QB 10, something around there in your drafts. And that's just ridiculous, behind Shadur Sanders, behind Jalen Milroe. But I would say that Dylan Gabriel has a much better shot at making the NFL and actually doing something in the NFL. And then think about the situation he's in this year and what he's going to have, the supporting cast he's going to have. We already know Dan Lanning's system is great. It works great for QBs. It's going to, he's going to dominate this year. He very well could win the Heisman. And then next thing you know, he's a first-round pick in the NFL draft. And it's like, why didn't we because we thought he was 5'11". That's why we didn't like him.
Yeah, I could go either way with Dylan Gabriel because, like you said, he has a pretty promising resume, but also injury history, not, just necessarily the frame. And maybe those things go together, or maybe they are unrelated. We've seen guys, undersized guys coming out of college more and more nowadays. You get the Russell Wilsons of the world and Kyler Murray's and now Bryce Young. And I mean, I guess there's not a whole lot of precedent for guys who are non-elite runners really making it when they're that smaller type of quarterback nowadays. But maybe you could point to if he could just be in the right system like a Russell Wilson was, he could be a smart passer. He could be competent enough as a rusher, all those types of things. I just, you doubt a little bit that Dylan Gabriel is quite that good of a rusher as well. So I think for me, safe player, absolutely. And he's going to show up well in models. I just think the NFL might doubt him a bit just to invest like day one draft capital. So that high end ceiling, I think, is kind of in doubt. So as far as could he rise up to being a top 5 quarterback in this class? Absolutely. Does that mean that he's going to be a great NFL asset or even like a above average NFL asset for your dynasty team? I'm a little bit skeptical at this point, but there's guys who have all the tools but have not done it yet, like Drew LR, Penn State. quarterback. I mean, yes, he has the tools. He could be a much better NFL quarterback, but nothing that he's done thus far would make us suggest that we should be confident in him doing that. Will Howard, a guy transferring to Ohio State, has an opportunity to start there and quarterback a very good offense. I mean, we don't even know for sure that he's going to be the quarterback there. And ultimately, he's done some up and down things thus far in college. Like, he's flashed some really great performances, and he's also been inconsistent. So I think that Will Howard, again, a guy who has a higher ceiling, he probably has better mobility and I would say better arm talent. But I mean, again, do you trust that? So it depends. How much are you looking for that true upside, that boom or bust? Because Dylan Gabriel gives you the floor, but some of these other guys that I just mentioned, LR and Howard, maybe a little bit more of the ceiling, but their floors are also super low too.
Yeah, I almost threw up in my mouth when you mentioned Will Howard. Like you said, he might not even win the job, and the fact that you might not win the job over Devin Brown says all you need to say about that player because they are not good quarterbacks. So yeah, I got nothing to say nice about Will Howard, but I do have a couple like sleepers or whatever you want to call it for the 2025 class, and I know that these are definitely probably well, one of them is considered more probably like a C2C play, but I think there's a small chance that Kyron Drones could slip into the conversation for for like a top 5 QB in the class, which once again, we're not saying it's this amazing class. So top 5 might not be saying too much, but a draftable guy, a player that could see the field, a backup, whatever, but a backup with that athleticism, that upside, that ceiling that we love. So like, that's the kind of player that I want to bet on. If I'm going to bet on a backup, I don't want to bet on, like like a Quinn Ewers. Like, that's like the backup that I don't want to bet on because I don't think the ceiling's there. Even though I'm saying like he's done enough to be up in that mix, Kyron Drones isn't that far behind him. And but that is the kind of guy that I would want to bet on because if he hits, he's gonna be that top 5 guy, like that kind of thing. In the for fantasy purposes at least. And so that's who I want to think. But do you think that he could slip in, or you think he's more of just like a CFF kind of guy?
I think he's a fun rusher too. So we talked a little bit about Jalen Milroe earlier, and he's not quite that dynamic, but I think that there's at least some scrambling ability, some mobility components to Salter's game. I just think that he's a little bit raw as a passer, so he's definitely got to take that step forward. And I don't know if that's the optimal place for him to do so or to really develop. But hey, think about it like this: he puts up a really another solid season. Maybe Oregon comes calling, maybe some big time team comes calling next year, Alabama. I don't know. And they're just really interested in a guy who has experience, who has mobility, pretty good arm talent, all those things. And maybe Salter makes that jump up. And we know nowadays guys can really pop in their 4th, 5th year, get first round draft capital. It's happening. It happened twice this year. The NFL is starved for quarterback talent, and Caden Salter honestly does have some raw talent, raw ability. Sorry, Kyron Jones.
I was going to say, how do we get to Caden Salter?
That's my bad, because I had written down on my deep list of sleepers like Caden Salter somewhere, but Kyron Jones is of course who we're talking about there. But I don't know why I slipped in Salter's name. But yeah, I do like the Jones call out. I would be curious to see if Brady Cook also was somebody you were considering there. So a Missouri quarterback who really just under the radar season, very, very solid season for Missouri this year. And I mean, he's going to have Luther Burden to pass the ball to. He's going to continue to have Theo Weiss and Marcus Johnson and these other guys. Crutchfield, who's a freshman wide receiver. Like there's just a lot of intrigue, I guess, at Missouri right now. And they're coming off a good season. I don't see any reason for them to suddenly drop off. And Brady Cook, he has enough size, he has enough arm talent and fair mobility, that's for sure. So I think he's an intriguing guy. I mean, he had how many rushing yards? almost 600 rushing yards as a junior, and then this last year as technically a senior, redshirt junior, whatever you want to call him. He had over 300 yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. So certainly a tough guy, a tough quarterback running the ball. Maybe not the most explosive, but certainly a combination of arm and a little bit of mobility there with Brady Cook.
Yeah, I have him 2 spots behind Kyron, so I definitely have him there in the mix. And then we've already gone almost 35 minutes here on quarterback. So I was going to talk about like a true sleeper, but I'll save it for the C2C sleepers pod. And because I don't want to waste too much time on it, but I do think there's another player that is like the sneakiest sleeper that could pull like 1 year and done, make it to the NFL kind of deal. And so we'll talk about him next week, though. Why don't we go ahead and, unless you have any other QBs you want to talk about, why don't we go ahead and dive into the RBs here? And just to speed up a little bit, I think we could probably just talk about like a tier of running backs here. I mean, even if you want to break them up, let's just talk about like the top 4 or 5 guys here: Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Nick Singleton, Trevor Etienne. And I'll stop there because the next guy might be a little more controversial. But I think that like those are all guys that we feel fairly confident about. I actually have some concerns about Quinshon Judkins, but it's more like off the field attitude kind of stuff, more so than like actual play or anything that like I'm truly worried about. There's a little bit of like a lack of burst, a lack of athleticism that I worry about with Quinshon, but obviously he's in a great spot. He has a running first offensive coordinator that's going to want to run the ball all the time. So like I can't hate on Quinshon by any means, but I do worry about him a little bit. Ever since the whole Zach Evans debacle, in the NFL, I kind of like worry about these head cases, and I worry that Quinshon might be another one of those at least. But Trevion Henderson is an absolute stud. He's my RB1. He's the only RB I have in tier 1. That might be shocking to people because I know people are like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest running back class in the history of the world." But I mean, like, don't get me wrong. There's a buttload of depth, but I really feel like there's only one true like proven running back. Everyone else kind of needs to either take a step forward, show us you can do it for a second season, third season, whatever, like that kind of thing. And like Nick Singleton would definitely fall into that. Like he showed us that he can catch a little bit, but he needs to show us that he can actually be a running back and not just be a fast guy, and that maybe like work on the receiving game a little bit more. So there's definitely some question marks, even though these are the top guys. And then you have Trevor Etienne, who I absolutely love. I think he's in a great situation. Obviously, he had the DUI, which isn't great. I don't think it's going to truly affect him. But in the grand scheme of things, I think he's going to end up being drafted very highly.
Yeah, at this rate, every Georgia player is going to have some sort of, traffic violation or, some sort of crazy things going on with their vehicles. So, yeah,
Yep.
no, I don't think that will affect him too much. But yeah, as far as the top of this class for the running back position, I don't care if you have Travion Henderson alone at 1. I don't care if you have Quinshon Judkins right there with him. I do think that Travion Henderson does at least belong ranked 1, whether you say there's a tier or not. That's up to the individual person. I do think that Travion Henderson's burst and athleticism, that's really what makes that difference, makes the edge for me. And I think that Quinshon a little bit more of that banger, a little bit more of the physical inside type of runner. And like you said, there potentially is that off the field type of concern that you're hearing some rumors of, and then transferring out of Ole Miss, and they didn't want to keep him around too much, or at least that's kind of what we're looking into it. That's what we're seeing. We don't know exactly what was going on inside the building, but what we do know is that Travion Henderson is a elite athlete. He's a very, very good runner and a capable receiver. That's for sure. Just health being the biggest thing, but he just needs a healthy season, and what better way to ensure that he stays healthy this season than bring in a guy who can handle a lot of carries as well. So I think that Quinshon will be a little bit more of, I mean, I don't want to call him a bruiser because I don't think he's like a sluggish guy. I don't know. We talked about this when he was a freshman. I was like, I don't know that he has the best burst out there, like the best top end speed. And I know there were some mile per hour marks that he hit as a freshman that were promising, but he doesn't consistently do it. And that shows up now in the data. With having a bigger sample size and having more volume. So is it purely just because he had such a high volume workload? Is that why his efficiency dipped, or what's going on with Quinshon Judkins? But yeah, slightly below Henderson. That makes sense. And then Singleton, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't need to hash it out again with Singleton at Penn State, is that he just needs to figure out how to be a better runner. I don't know if he's the best fit right now for their scheme, but he has actually shown some competent receiving abilities too. So I'm really super excited to see what he does this season. I think he's head and shoulders above a talent like a Katron Allen, who's also there. But obviously the coaching staff likes the consistency and the solid physical nature of Katron Allen as a runner too. So we want to see that step up for Singleton. I don't know if it ultimately happens. And then ETN set up for success at Georgia, assuming that nothing else happens. There's no other incidents, infractions, or otherwise. ETN should be a very, very prominent player in that backfield. And honestly, there's so many other running backs here after. I would say that it drops off a little bit after that. But like you said, there's just a ton of talent there. I think it's maybe worth running down the names of the guys without actually talking in depth about them, just so folks can hear how many names there actually are out there.
Yeah, and I actually have a couple that you didn't even list that are in this like tier, at least for me, with your Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton, Ollie Gordon, Damian Martinez. I actually have Devin Neal slightly lower, but not that much lower. So we can throw him in here. Donovan Edwards. I'm trying to see. I think that's where I have a tier break after that. But I also have Jarquez Hunter in there, which I think is kind of a forgotten man. People just want to hate on him. Like he had some off the field issues of his own, but I mean, I haven't heard anything else about it. I'm not saying that that more won't come out or he won't have any more issues, but I do have Jarquez Hunter in that same spot. And then I think, then I have a tier break. So I said Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton, Ollie Gordon, Damian Martinez, and Jarquez Hunter for me. Is there anyone else that you have in that same, like, we'll say tier 3 for me? Because I have Travion Henderson in tier 1, then I have Singleton, ETN, and Judkins in tier 2, and then I have I have Jade Knott in the tier 3 as well, with the Hunter and Ollie Gordon and all them.
Sure. Yeah, I would also throw in, and you already mentioned him from the list that we threw out there, I guess, for this topic, but Devin Neal, certainly, borderline there, but at the same time, he is a pretty good player. It's just a little weird having him come back to school, and what seems to be such a good upcoming class. But Donovan Edwards, going to resume a prominent role there at Michigan. I shouldn't even say resume, but take over a more prominent role at Michigan. We know the receiving ability. We know the athletic upside. He's set up for a pretty huge monster year, and coming back from patellar tendon repair. So that, I think, was a big factor last season for why the efficiency dipped down. Huge discount at him right now in C2C and Devy drafts. So take advantage of that depending on who you're drafting with. And then Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, a guy who's kind of been somewhat forgotten about, and, injuries and weight gain and all those other things. I get why he's dropped, but a guy who has that much natural talent and receiving ability too at the running back position with a workhorse size. If he can just get right, it'd be a huge win for you, but also a big risk that he's just nothing. But that's kind of how it is with all these running backs. I mean, I could name off Jam Miller, and Jam Miller could have a very promising breakout year, or at least sharing time there at Alabama, or he could do nothing and transfer to a G5 school and never be heard from again, or be a late round guy, undrafted free agent. So there are a few other names that I wanted to throw out there. I guess Jordan James, Oregon back, he's going to be set up for a breakout year. And then you go down the list and it's like, well, there is some opportunity there now that we don't have Jonathan Brooks at Texas anymore. Could Jaden Blue actually step up? There's potential for that. And he's around that 200-pound mark too. So it's not like the guy is tiny by any means. He never really ended up being as big as what was advertised in high school, but I still think he has enough size and athleticism and burst. Where CJ Baxter, I know he's a stud, but maybe they just try to get Blue a little bit more of the touches to replace Brooks as that more bursty guy. And then maybe a DJ Giddens. You hear about him a lot. I got to throw him out there. Shout out to the Back to Devy guys. I know, overall they like Giddens. I mean, there's even more names that I don't think we need to spend time on, but that shows you the depth there. That's what at least 12 names, if not more, already at the running back position. And look at what we have this year. We only have like a couple names in rookie drafts that we're even excited about.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely deep. I worry that people are going to get too hyped on the class, and that when it's all said and done, you only have so many landing spots that are going to be viable, and this and that. And I know we talked about it on the last pod, and you mentioned probably 12 different spots or maybe even more that like could use a running back. So I get that, but we also know that's not how this works. Like the NFL doesn't do it. The NFL doesn't go, oh, these 12 teams need a running back. Let's draft the best running backs to these 12 teams. Like they don't do that. It never works out that way. You end up with Zach Charbonnet going to, Seattle. You end up with Braylon Allen going to New York, and like Bucky Irving going to Tampa. Like this stuff happens every single year. So we have more guys that can be those, like, be those martyrs or whatever. So like it can work out, and it's going to work out for probably a lot of these guys. But for as many as it does, I feel like there's going to be so many misses. So I just don't want people to overinvest in this running back class or even this draft class and be like, oh my God, the running backs are going to be insane. It's like, once again, remember, there's one tier one running back at least as far as I'm concerned. So just remember that. Yes, it's a great running back class. It's deep, but there's one tier one running back as of right now. If people take a step forward, whatever, that's great. But I'm right there with you. I have Devin Neal, DJ Giddens, Jordan James, Rocket Sanders, LaQuint Allen is another one that I have in there that we could talk about. And then I actually have a couple, like two sleepers that, I mean, are definitely less likely to hit, but not that far behind that grouping. And one of them is Quali Conley out of San Jose State. And I know obviously coming out of the MAC is not going to be great. Like the odds are not great, but we see a couple small school guys, make it, get in the third round NFL draft capital every year. And I wonder if he could do that. He's a senior, so he's already put in his 4 years, or this will be his fourth year. So that's generally when you see these small school guys come out. I think this could be the year. He is, 6 foot, 203 pounds. His no, I was looking at the wrong thing. He's 5'10", 210 pounds. He has an 11.5% big time run rate. So I mean, that is showing crazy burst and athleticism that obviously I love. 2.1 receptions per game. So he's at least hitting thresholds that we like to see for the receiving game. 1.2 PPR points per touch, 84 yards, scrimmage yards per game. This is all kind of reminding me of Kamani Vidal from last year, like how I was feeling about him. And maybe I'm riding that high because I was all over Vidal, and then all of a sudden now he's like the hottest thing in all of Dynasty. So maybe I'm just riding that high, but I definitely want to mention that I think Quali Conley could possibly be in that mix when it's all said and done. And then the last one is a player that I've heard a lot of other people talking about recently, but I just want to mention he's kind of right there, right behind Quali, and that's Phil Maffa out of Clemson. I think he should at least be in the mix. He's definitely got the size. I worry about the athleticism a little bit, but he definitely has the size that the NFL covets. So I'd rather bank on Conley, but I've heard so many people talking about Phil Maffa is going to have a year and this and that. So like I at least feel like I should mention him, that he definitely is a sleeper.
Yeah, definitely a little bit bigger back, and Conley seems more bursty from what you're saying. And Conley's actually transferring to Arizona, and Arizona's
That's
vacating Yeah, they're vacating some touches, so I think he'll get an opportunity there, though it's never a given that a guy moving up in competition levels will really take off. But we'll see for sure. Like you said, he has some underlying metrics that seem promising, and honestly, not a guy I've really watched film of. But I would also add in there a guy who is actually leaving Arizona, going to Washington, Jonah Coleman, worth shouting out for sure. He's kind of similar in a lot of ways to a Phil Maffa, though. TJ Harden, kind of in that same mold, like big enough guy, enough burst. I don't know how UCLA will do, but TJ Harden is interesting. And I got to shout out my Minnesota Gopher, Darius Taylor. I don't know necessarily. I mean, he's going to have a large workload. I think he's more athletic than a Mo Ibrahim ever was, but at the same time, is it quite enough? Is that going to be athleticism wise, going to be something that pairs well with the NFL, or is he mostly just a college back? And I realize he didn't have quite the blow up season everybody anticipated, but still very good. Or actually, is
He's a
he?
sophomore.
Oh yeah,
I was just like, why am I not seeing Taylor? And I'm scrolling through and I'm like, oh, because I took away the sophomores.
Good point. Well, I knew it would sneak in there. Huh? We talk about enough guys, and then what? Dylan Sampson? Is he eligible too?
Oh yeah, you know what? I Samson was right at that tier break below Jarquez Hunter, and he was the next guy. Dylan Sampson was, and then I completely skipped over his name and I started talking about other guys. So yeah, Samson is definitely up there for me. I cannot believe that I mentioned or forgot to mention his name because you know how much I love Samson. So yeah, that's my baby. Yeah, I think that like he hasn't proven enough yet, but I feel like he's going to have every opportunity to prove it this year. And so if the talent shines through, he could easily be in that mix with those guys that we were talking about before. And I also forgot to mention Jonah Coleman. I'm glad you brought him up because I definitely have him in that mix as well. So it's crazy, but we literally have like 30 players that could hit. And so it's great. But like I said, I just don't want people to get too overly hyped or anything like that. Do you want to talk about any other running backs before we dive into the wide receivers? Because I feel like this one's going to probably be a little more fun.
Yeah, I mean, wide receivers super fun, but also there's some ambiguity this year. So I would say that more proven talent, or at least somewhat proven talent, at the running back position, and I get the idea that some of these guys are going to land in bad spots, but like you said, there's enough martyrs. I kind of liked that term that you used. Who will land in some suboptimal spots where some of these talented guys, they're going to go day 3, but they might land in that perfect spot. So I'm kind of excited for that just because there's so much quality depth. Even if some return, you're going to see plenty that the NFL can kind of take advantage of. And that's what they do with running backs. They take advantage of them. They should be paid and protected better, but they're not. So there's going to be lots of day 3 guys you'd think next year out of the running back position that'll be more exciting than what we're seeing even this year for sure. But yeah.
I think you're right. The wide receivers are more fun, or I said the wide receivers are more fun, but I just mean we're going to disagree more because I feel like we agreed way too much with the running backs. But I mean, it's just because that's who's proven. Like the running backs are proven. It's very easy for us to go. We might have this guy 2 spots ahead of this guy or whatever, but we can say they're all in the same tier. Let's see what happens this year. And then, we'll actually make our final determination when it's all said and done. The wide receivers, we cannot say that at all. I mean, it's almost the complete opposite. I feel like there's 5 proven players, like actual proven players. And even those, saying 5 might be a little iffy. It's kind of like you really have like 2 proven players and then some question marks, but just so that I don't get burnt at a stake, I think that I should say 5 at least. But then people are going to sit there and go, oh, what about this guy, what about that guy? So why don't you start me off with your top wide receiver, like start me with your top tier. Who do you got in there? Just make sure you don't mention Luther Burden.
It's 4 guys, and I absolutely am going to mention Luther Burden. I think he needs some credit here. Tet McMillan, Luther Burden, Evan Stewart, Emeka Egbuka. So Tet, Arizona, Luther Burden, Missouri, Evan Stewart now transferring from Texas A&M, and he's going to join Oregon, and then Emeka Egbuka another year at Ohio State, but now Marvin Harrison Jr. is not there, so Emeka Egbuka. I mean, he's still going to have plenty of competition, yes, but we know that Emeka is a good player, very safe guy to have in that upper tier. Whether you have him in tier 1 or somehow have him a little bit lower, he is a safe guy at this point. And then a little bit more boom bust guys like an Evan Stewart and Luther Burden. Certainly, I still have faith in Luther Burden, kind of always have been a big fan, and he did some of the things he needed to this year. We've talked about it in private. He needs to do more, yes, but he's on that trajectory. I think he's going to continue to do it in an offense that we already kind of touted earlier as maybe a rising offense, or at least another one that Missouri should have another good year. And then Evan Stewart, well, we talked about how Oregon and the consistency that Dillon Gabriel can bring in offense, and the competency as a passer. Even if, Dillon Gabriel's not great, then Dante Moore could probably do a solid job at Oregon too. There's some safety with knowing that Evan Stewart is going to a pretty solid passing and just a solid team in general, but passing attack specifically. And then Tet McMillan, Arizona, I mean, he's going to retain that, I guess, like the quarterback play is staying steady there. I mean, I know there's a coaching staff change, but at the end of the day, Tet's a stud. They're going to find him. He's going to dominate, and he's absolutely a candidate to be the wide receiver 1 in this class. I have him there. I think you have him there. He's not like Drake London clone, but I think in a lot of ways safe. Going to be kind of safe analytically, and we know that some of these big guys can play at the NFL level. It's not always a red flag having a guy be quite tall and everything that Tet McMillan brings to the table. He's more than just a jump ball specialist.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with you about Tet. He's my wide receiver 1. He's my only tier 1 wide receiver, and I'm not like truly offended or anything like that, but I feel like it's disrespectful to Tet to have Luther Burden in the same mix, because Luther Burden has to take a step forward as a player to be the player that people want Luther Burden to be. He needs to learn how to run routes. He needs to learn how to be a well-rounded wide receiver. Tet doesn't have to do anything. Tet just has to be Tet. That's all. He has to go do what he did last year, and he's going to be the wide receiver 1 in the class. And so that's why he is my clear tier 1, the only tier 1 player for me. Luther Burden, I mean, obviously it doesn't really truly matter, but like, even if you look at like Tet ran 501 routes last year. Luther Burden ran 367. So, I mean, that's just in one season. You almost have an extra, 20% of routes run by Tet, and he's just that much better. A higher ADOT, higher yards per reception, more yards. The yards per team pass attempt is higher. Market share is higher. Like, everything about it is just better. And yet, people want to put Luther Burden up there. I just feel like he has a lot of growing to do. Obviously, it could happen. I don't want to bank on it. And like you said, we kind of both like Brady Cook. We were talking about him earlier. I almost wonder if Brady Cook is elevating, Luther Burden more than Luther Burden is elevating Brady Cook.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Luther Burden stepped into a different role, and that, really is a big reason for why he was utilized more down the field instead of in that shorter underneath role. And yeah, I mean, I think Cook could coincide with that, absolutely. But that's usually what we see out of these breakout wide receivers, is that they have competent quarterback play that helps elevate them for sure. So yeah, again, not trying to be a slight to Tet McMillan, but Tet McMillan also had to undergo a surgery for a foot injury, I believe, this spring. They said that they hope he's back for the 2024 season. But I know it doesn't sound super serious because nobody has any information about it. So we're just all hoping for the best, but we just don't know if that's going to make Tet have kind of a slow start to the season and or impact his entire season. He could be completely fine, or he could be significantly impacted. Those big wide receivers, you don't like to see those foot injuries. So yeah, let's hope it's not something that like Rashad Bateman has dealt with in Baltimore. That would just be terrible for a guy like that. I'm not saying that's the case. We don't know. So there's a little bit of ambiguity there. You can't drop him far. Like I said, he's wide receiver 1 there, but we are trying to project which are the best players for the 2025 draft. We're not saying who is the best as of right now. We are trying to give ranks for the purposes of, who is going to end up being the best. And I think that Luther Burden's skills, that's why I think that he's in that top tier. At this very moment, it is safer to hedge or to bet with McMillan. Absolutely. But same thing with Evan Stewart, right? Evan Stewart has not put it together yet. And he's a little bit of a projection. So you could also say the same thing. Like, he shouldn't be there with Tet, but he is just so talented that I think that the talent alone warrants a spot very highly in ranks. However you want to rank that, he should be in the top, 4 or so wide receivers, at least in this 2025 class for sure.
Yeah, and that's my top 4. I literally have 4 different tiers in my top 4. And so, like, that's what I want to portray or convey to people is that, yes, there are, those are the top guys right now because they're the most proven players. But it would not surprise me if like 5 guys, a handful of guys, jump Luther Burden this year because they're not that far behind that tier 3 or whatever, and they take a step forward. Luther Burden does more of the same. But that's probably enough about Burden. I just think, like it doesn't get talked about enough. And so whenever we get on him, I want to talk about, like, he's not this perfect prospect that a lot of people try to act like. And same thing with Evan Stewart, like you said. That actually brings me to my other tier 4 player and my 5th wide receiver, and that's Alec Amanor. And that's out of Stanford. I fell in love with him last year. I think he is probably one of the most underrated wide receivers in the game right now. I put out my ranks with him as my 5th wide receiver, and a lot of people were thrown back by it and like taken aback by it. They were not ready for that one. But like, tell me that he's not one of the more proven players in all of college football right now, proven wide receivers at least. He has to be. Like, he did it against Travis Hunter. He had that huge 300-yard game, but he had so much more than that. It wasn't just the one game, and he had an amazing year. And like, now we're just expecting more of the same. I mean, you were saying how earlier, like, oh, a lot of these breakout wide receivers have really competent quarterback. He did not have a competent quarterback situation. He had a pretty crappy quarterback situation, and he still did what he did. So imagine if Ashton Daniels takes a step forward this year, or they bring someone else in, whatever. Like, just imagine there's slightly better quarterback play this year, and tell me that he's not going to just stand out. Once again, he's a tier 4 player for me. I'm not saying, oh, he's an absolute stud or anything like that, but I feel like he deserves to be in the talks here, at least around this range.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the rise to become an elite guy, that's what, like, Jaden Daniels did for Malik Neighbors, for example. Roma Dunze, got from that offense in Washington, and you kind of go down the list there as far as pretty high end quarterbacks, or at least very solid guys. Boosting up Brian Thomas Jr. Xavier Worthy has had at least maintained with Quinn Ewers. You go down the list, of course, and I actually think that Ashton Daniels isn't a terrible quarterback. I just don't think he's a great quarterback either, right? He's not a Devy prospect, but
he's young. He's young too. Like, he can actually take a step forward. He's not some like 6-year quarterback or something like that,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm with you there as far as him taking a step forward and or just being competent enough to still feed a guy like that. So I don't mind that rank at all. I still have him in a tier of a couple players there who could potentially sub in or out. But yeah, Alec, I mean, he's gaining steam in the scouting industry. Or at least in the Devy industry. People are talking about him more and more now, and it's justified. I mean, he's had some great games. He just needs to string it together and show that he has enough athleticism too. I think that's maybe the big thing, is just showing that he can win with speed, some breakaway speed, of course, down the field. But yeah, what he did in his second year after not having any production as a freshman was very, very notable. So definitely worth mentioning him. I know we kind of got off on a tangent with the Luther Burden talk. We probably would as well if we went into Travis Hunter too in depth. But let's just put it this way. He's another one where it's like, you bet on the talent, you bet on a huge breakout, either I mean, I'll be honest, with Travis Hunter, it's like you can't really use the same analytical thresholds. You can't really expect the same types of things for a guy who's playing half his snaps on defense. But at the end of the day, he's not going to be a pretty prospect. There's going to be a lot of disagreements about his refinement of the game, especially as a wide receiver, or if he's even going to play that position. So I get the hesitancy to want to have him very high in ranks. It's easier just to pass and say, let somebody else have this headache and this, or he's already kind of a coin flip, right? He's not a surefire great dynasty asset. So I think there is development that needs to happen for Travis Hunter. But at the end of the day, the skills, the upside, athleticism, all that, just oozing with talent. Upside is there if you want to take a gamble on him. But I actually prefer a different guy, Isaiah Bond, who's going from Bama to Texas, above a Travis Hunter, above Alec Ayamanor. Isaiah Bond for me just has the athleticism that you're really looking for. I think he's set up for a really, really solid season there. I'm not a big vacated targets guy. I don't think our listeners should be either, but I think that at the end of the day, like Texas, it's a really good spot for some passing production this year, some recognition as a top team in the entire nation. And Isaiah Bond, I mean, he's had to deal with kind of inconsistent quarterback passing play. So I would say that, Bond is getting into a situation where hopefully Ewers can continue to build that consistency as a passer, or if he doesn't, well, then they have Arch Manning sitting there at Texas. So that's pretty nice spot to be in if you're Isaiah Bond transferring in. There's not a lot of proven talent there. There's a lot of talent at Texas, but I think Isaiah Bond can be a top 2 wide receiver for them. And we saw 2 wide receivers go early in the NFL draft this year from Texas. I think you could see, multiple wide receivers emerge for Texas this upcoming season as well.
Yeah, so I'm with you with Travis Hunter as far as like I struggle to put him in like the top with the top guys. I just can't do it. I get, obviously you have the he's playing both ways and all that kind of stuff. We can make excuses for him, but I have him back to back with Barry and Brown, which is another guy here on the list. And like, I think it's 2 athletic guys that need to take a step forward, like that need to show us that they're more than just athleticism. They're more than just like, I'm bigger and faster and stronger than the DBs that I'm playing against. And, like they can do it this year. Like it's possible for them to do it this year. Hopefully Barry and Brown has a quarterback upgrade, because it's really difficult to get much worse than Devin Leary and Will Levis the past couple of years. So if my boy, I can't even remember his name, so he's not much of my boy, I guess. But if he can come in there and the new quarterback can step in and do well, then I feel like we can, hopefully see Barry and Brown, take a step forward. I don't know what's going to like change for Travis Hunter. It's just, like it's going to be more of the same. Maybe he decides this year like which position he wants to play, and like in kind of leans more towards one way or the other. I don't know. I've heard people say that he's not a very good corner. I don't know. I don't pay attention to defense. So like maybe he's going to lean wide receiver, and maybe he does that this year, and then he's able to focus more on it and he takes that step forward he needs. I can't really get on board with Bond. I kind of struggle with Isaiah Bond. I get what you're saying. Like he has the opportunity. Obviously he has the athleticism that we love. But he's paired with a quarterback that doesn't do well with athletic wide receivers. So I kind of struggle to see how Bond's all of a sudden going to just be this absolute stud or anything like that. I don't hate Isaiah Bond. I just don't like having him in that same tier. I at least have him a tier behind those guys. And then, you also have Matthew Golden, who's obviously his teammate. He's basically like not even on my radar anymore. Like he's not even considered a starter up for the team. I guess that could always change, but we've always kind of been out on Golden. I was out from the start. You came around very shortly after that, so I don't think much has changed, but he is here on the list. I just figured while we're talking about his teammate, we might as well mention I want nothing to do with Matthew Golden either.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's got to be guys who step up for Texas this year. And like you said, it's probably not going to be Golden. It's probably not going to be Silas Bolden out of Oregon State. Those guys are not really options. Isaiah Bond and Jonte Cook probably going to be the top 2 guys. And we saw how the NFL really was able to decipher, what Quinn Ewers' limitations were and still value the players that, AD Mitchell, who I don't think AD Mitchell is nearly as good as Isaiah Bond or, Xavier Worthy were. I think at the end of the day, yeah, they don't have to. They're going to be on a top end team. I think there's going to be a lot of quality film on them. Yeah, I just am again more comfortable projecting Isaiah Bond to take that step up. I think that's where the difference comes in for sure. But as far as some other players, I mean, you mentioned Matthew Golden. I mostly, included him as a guy who, I mean, he still gets a lot of hype, a lot of talk. I'm not really there with him, but I'm not maybe on that extreme. I'm somewhere in the middle, right? I don't love him, don't absolutely hate him, but I'm not trying to put him as like a top 10 wide receiver in the class at this time. Same thing with Antonio Williams, like great freshman recruit, but to this point just has not done it, has just not been explosive. He's not been healthy, or at least last year was not healthy. He has a lot of competition coming in at Clemson, and the quarterback play is just garbage right now at Clemson. And the coaching staff is not willing to adapt to change. And the system that they put in last year just is not really making me think that Antonio Williams is about to be this super dynamic player. I think there's guys coming in that are going to be more exciting than him. So at the end of the day, Antonio Williams, too bad that we maybe have not been able to see the caliber of player that he was coming out of high school. But at this point, 2 years in, I'm not going to keep holding on to that high school highlight film and production and that star rating. It's just, I got to let it go a little bit, in my opinion. But I'm trying not to rag on this wide receiver group here. I swear there are some guys that are exciting. What guys are exciting here, John, from ones that we haven't touched on yet in this wide receiver class for 2025?
Definitely not Antonio Williams. I can tell you that much. Honestly, Trey Harris is probably one of the most exciting players for me. Unfortunately, a fifth-year player because of injuries, most likely, because I think he would have come out this year, although obviously it was a great wide receiver class, so we can't guarantee that. But wide receiver out of Ole Miss does basically everything that I want him to do, like per play, per route, all that kind of stuff, but just got hurt at a terrible time last year, and it really affected his play. It affected everyone, really. And I'd love for him to come back, be 100% healthy, and just dominate this year. I think he has the ability to even jump a guy like an Isaiah Bond or something like that. Like, even though you might not bet on it per se, but like, I think he has that ability. And so I love Trey Harris there. I know a lot of people are getting excited about Deion Burks. I don't hate him, but I actually have him 2 spots behind Isaiah Bond. So, I mean, I definitely do not mind Burks at all. I would say, senior, we're kind of getting towards the end of the whole like COVID stuff now. Like, this is literally the last year that COVID will affect our players, except for players that stayed in school for like 5-6 years or whatever. But like your normal players, like COVID will no longer be affecting these guys. And so like we're seeing Deion Burks Sr., Trey Harris, 5th-year player, all that kind of stuff. Like, this might be the last year where we truly like even worry about these guys anymore, and after this, it might be more get back to like, hey, are you a junior? Okay, okay, we can let a couple seniors in because of this or that or whatever. But for now, we're still dealing with these 5th and 6th-year players, like we were talking about it with Dylan Gabriel earlier. Like, I still believe, even though he's a 6th-year player, I still believe in Trey Harris, because even though he's a 5th-year player, and Burks, as a senior, he hits a lot of those thresholds that I like to see. And I want to say that he transferred up. I cannot remember where he transferred to.
Purdue to Oklahoma for Burks, you're saying?
Yes, that's right.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I mean,
Oklahoma's
we're
set up.
yeah, we're hoping that it's it's going to even be a step forward for him, with the quarterback play and everything. So hopefully for Burks, it'll be he'll have the ability to take a step forward. But I have a list of 7 wide receivers that I consider sleepers that are actually going pretty damn late in ADP. Now, I will admit that I was looking at C2C ADP because, like I said, I thought we were doing C2C sleepers tonight. So I have quite a few players here, and their ADP is based off of C2C, but most of the time Devy and C2C correlate pretty well. So I mean, like, there's not too many times that the Devy guys like fall drastically, unless it's just like, I don't think this guy's going to really hardly touch the field, but I know he's going to be drafted by the NFL or something like that, which is fairly rare. But is there anyone else you want to talk about before I dive into this huge list of sleeper wide receivers here?
No, other than I don't mind the Trey Harris talk. I mean, we've talked about him before, and he's gaining a little bit of steam out there. I'm trying to remember the couple guys on Twitter that have been, touting him. I mean, I think at All-Purpose Scout, Jason DiRienzo. I mean, he's been talking about Trey Harris today. Yeah, I've seen a couple of things recently, and that offense is set up for success with Jackson Dart. So we talked about that earlier, how that offense should be able to take a step forwards. I think Harris could be a huge part of it, just like he was a huge part of it last year. He has established rapport with the quarterback already. So there are a couple guys I'm really hoping you mention here, but if you don't, I definitely will. So you go for it.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to name my first three, and then you can discuss, and you can throw in any names that you want to mention, and then we can dive in more if we have enough time after that. Now the first player is a player that I think that we both love. We've discussed this player off air. I don't know if we've ever actually discussed him on air. I cannot remember, but it's Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. I think that he's going to have a pretty damn good year, and he's going as the wide receiver 65 in C2C drafts right now, 149th overall. And just based on what he did last year and what I think he's going to do, because I mean, we're expecting Rocco Beck to kind of take a step forward. A lot of people are starting to get excited about Rocco Beck, the quarterback for Iowa State. So if we're excited about all that, we should be excited about a player with an 18.5 yards per reception, at 13.2 ADOT, high PPR points per touch, almost 1,000 yards receiving last year. Just like everything, 31% market share. Like, those are the kind of numbers that get you drafted early in the NFL, even if it's a third round pick or whatever. I mean, early-ish. I'm not like guaranteeing a first round pick or anything like that, of course. But when you're considering wide receiver 65, and I have them in like probably my 30s, because what I'm looking at right now doesn't have freshmen. So like, once I add in freshmen, he'd probably have like what, wide receiver 35 for me or something like that. So I just feel like I'm much higher on Jaden Higgins than a lot of people. And because that probably took longer than it should have, I'll let you rebut on Higgins here.
No, I mean, I won't rebut by any means, because I don't mind it. He was a guy that I was targeting earlier this offseason. I was asking you about him for sure. And because he kind of caught my eye, and the production caught my eye for sure too. So set up in a good situation at Iowa State. And he's, I mean, a little bit of an older player, but maybe fourth year, fifth year at the most. So yeah, I guess I'm not too concerned about that factor. I think he's the discount version of like a Alec Amanor or somebody like that. I don't think he's quite as nuanced, with route running and those types of things yet. But yeah, that bigger wide receiver who can certainly be a nice discount. Maybe a Keon Coleman type of guy in this draft class. I mean, I think it's a fair comp, but I mean, he can be better analytically for sure than Keon Coleman was with another solid season.
Yeah, and I always liked Keon Coleman until this last year. Like, this last year is what turned me off of Keon, not his previous years at Michigan State. So, maybe that's what I'm picking up on here. Maybe I have a type, and hopefully he doesn't do what Keon Coleman did at FSU. Luckily, he's not transferring, and he has the same quarterback and everything, so it should be okay. My next player is probably I would say the most underrated wide receiver in all of Devy right now. And that is saying something, because there's probably 20 guys that we could say are underrated, or probably even more than that. And it's Dorian Singer. I know. I was all over the airwaves last year talking about Dorian Singer, saying how, like, he's going to be a stud, and it didn't work out. But I promise you, I feel it in my bones that it wasn't a scheme fit. It did not work with what they were trying to do at USC, what Caleb Williams does on a per play basis, and what Dorian Singer does. he crushed in his previous outing at Arizona. Then Arizona or Arizona State. I always confuse the two. Maybe because they have the same name, but I can't remember where he came from. I think it was Arizona. But then he goes over to USC, barely does anything. But now he's over at Utah. He is absolutely crushing it in the spring games and the spring practices. Everything's the Cam Rising to Dorian Singer show, and like they're talking about the rapport that they have, how much they're going to perform and everything. I get Utah might not be the sexiest school as far as putting out players and all that kind of stuff, but I promise you, if Dorian Singer goes out and does anything remotely close to what he did in Arizona, he's going to be back on the NFL's radar. And so, like, once again, he might not be a top 5 guy when it's all said and done or anything like that, but he can easily be one of those wide receivers that gets pushed up that we don't necessarily expect it to happen. And I'm not going to, like, I basically kept quiet on Ricky Pearsall because no one was on him. And I'm just like, I'm not going to talk about him because no one else is on him. It's probably just Beth picking up on something that she shouldn't be or whatever. And now he's a first-round draft pick, and I should have been all over him. I should have been talking about him on every single pod. I'm never doing that again. So I'm telling you, Dorian Singer is going to come back this year. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 80, 165 overall, and I honestly feel like that's high from what I've seen. I went and looked at some of the ranks from the C2C boys, and I mean, I'm talking like wide receiver 150 and stuff like that. It's like crazy talk. So probably the most underrated wide receiver in all of Devy right now and in all of C2C, because he's going to score points for your C2C teams too. So go get Dorian Singer.
Okay. I can't say I'm there fully with you, but I love the bold calls. And like you said, he's really cheap. So I mean, there's a big plus there. A guy who's put up that production and is that cheap. You told me you got another one.
Malachi Fields. You like that one a little bit better? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have debated a little bit of the upside part of it, but I do like Malachi Fields here at this point where it's like just a bunch of guys who, I mean, he could certainly rise in the class. He has enough size to him. I'm a little bit, turned off by the athleticism there. I just don't know that he's a game breaking type of guy. I don't think he's a slouch. I just think he's more Corey Davis than anything, more dynamic than that. So
the crazy part, his ADOT was 16.4 last year, which is like ridiculously high. You don't see too many players that are that high. I mean, you see some, like a Nick Anderson is right around that range. Trying to see anyone else is in the range.
Yeah. They definitely tried to throw it. Yeah, they definitely tried to throw it down the field to him. It's just he just didn't do a lot after the catch. That was kind of my big issue with them.
Sure.
He'd catch like a deep curl route or in route or out route or maybe just a deep ball, but no yak ability was concerning on my end, or at least very little.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's just a guy that I like that could take a step forward. He's going as wide receiver 73 right now, so just another guy that's like free 99. Another guy that's free 99, and then I'll let you bring up a player here because I said I was going to do 3 and I did 4. But Eric McAllister out of Boise State. I don't know if he transferred. There's been so many transfers. I honestly haven't updated everything.
TCU, I believe.
Okay. So, TCU is not the sexiest landing spot, but, honestly, Boise State's not the sexiest landing spot. So, it could be at least a lateral move, if nothing else. But I think Eric McAllister is another one of those players that with like a ridiculous ADOT, 20.2, 21.1 yards per reception. I don't think you're going to be too concerned with his yak ability, I would assume. But, you can tell me if I'm wrong with that one. Just everything about it. The yards per team pass attempt are off the freaking charts for McAllister. Yards per game, market share, like everything. PPR points per touch, 5.54 PPR points per touch for McAllister. So I love him as as a sleeper, but TCU, Boise State, and not the sexiest landing spots.
Yeah, no, I get that. But yeah, a lot of big playability there. Like you said, run after the catch ability, etc. So yeah, don't mind that at all. As far as a couple other guys that I do want to mention here, Torrey Horton, kind of just a forgotten guy at this point, but I do think he is a bounce back candidate. He's been sneakily very good at Colorado State. And I mean, he was kind of an ascending player somewhat at Nevada, but really kind of took it to the next level in 2022 at Colorado State. Huge share numbers, all those types of things. And then his role shifted a little bit, and he was also injured. So that affected kind of how they used him this last year. A lot more screens and those types of underneath passes. So his efficiency is not going to be there from this last season, even though he was heavily involved. I think he is kind of the G5 version and the discount version of like a Jordan Addison type of player. I mean, I'm not saying that that's definitely not a perfect comp by any means, but that's kind of how he's going to play. He's a little bit on the thin side, but 6'2", 175-ish pounds. And at the end of the day, I really like his hands, route running, those types of things. And he's had some ability to win down the field as more of a vertical threat in the past. I just need to see him get back to that level, prove that he is healthy this season. It's too bad he would have declared for the NFL draft, I would think, if he didn't get injured this season, because that really did impact his play. So I think that's a guy who, I mean, a G5 guy, so you don't have to draft him early. You know, the hit rates on those guys are not excellent by any means. But yeah, Torrey Horton as an option. And then I will say a guy that you'll hear a lot now to mention him is Jeremy Bernard going to Alabama. And neither of us are huge. I know I'm higher on him in comparison. He did some good things in extremely limited time as a true freshman at Michigan State. He beat the year 1-0 theory. So kind of did the minimum amounts there. And then last year he was stuck behind 3 day 1 or day 2 wide receivers, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, and Rome Odunze. And he still put up 400 plus receiving yards. Just was not maybe as explosive down the field, but that's not how they were using him. They were using him to fill in for that kind of McMillan slot role underneath. So I do think that the athletic abilities are there for him to be more than just a little slot guy. He certainly has the size, and it's telling that the Washington staff wanted to bring over a guy. So they're like, Jeremy, come over here. There's a wide open room for the most part. It's opened up even more just since that Jalen Hale injury. But I think that Jeremy Bernard certainly has the opportunity to ascend. It's just a matter of, is he quite that caliber of player, or is he more of that role type of guy? But I'm not going to blame him for not overcoming Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan there at Washington.
Yeah, I'm coming around on Jeremy Bernard. I kind of hated on him, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, even if I don't love Jalen McMillan, he's a draft, he's an NFL drafted player, like in the 4th round, late 3rd round, whatever it was.
Yeah, 3rd
I
round
like
by the Bucks, I think.
Yeah, Jalen Polk, is a player I like. Roma Dunze might be overrated, but he's still a high quality player. He's still good. And so, it's not that crazy to think that Jeremy Bernard didn't do that much when he was at Washington. So I am coming around on him. I'm still lower than probably most people on him, but I have him. He's in my top 40 now. I'll say that. So like I'm at least giving him credit where I probably wasn't giving him enough credit in the past. But the more I looked at it, the more I liked it. But one player I'm going to cheat here. One player that's just ahead of him, just ahead of one spot ahead of Jeremy Bernard, is a sophomore. So he's not coming out in 2025, but it's a player that I felt I needed to talk about one more time at least, because I talked about him about a month ago. But I recently talked to Andy Starr from the Devy University, my co-host over there, and he said that he was going to start pimping Jace Brown out of Kansas State as his guy. And I talked about him roughly a month ago, something like that. I brought him up as like a sleeper guy that I was kind of falling in love with, that kind of thing. And when he said that he was going to start talking about it, I was like, no. I got to put my foot down. I got to put my stamp on Jace Brown. So I'm doing it here. He was a freshman last year, sophomore this year. Obviously, he was dealing with Will Howard, who we already talked about earlier, that not a good quarterback, especially not a good passing quarterback. And yet he was still the third leading receiver on the team behind Ben Sinnott and Phillip Brooks. but that was as a true freshman. He led the team in yards per reception. He wasn't that far behind. He was, he had 3 touchdowns to Ben Sinat's 6. So, not that far behind all that. I love the athleticism. I love the size and everything for him. And I want to put it out there. He is one of my sleepers. He's somebody that I'm going to draft everywhere this year. And that's right, Andy, you are not getting him in our draft. Just so you understand, I will take him ahead of you. And now I guess I have to worry about Aaron taking him ahead of me. But, I'm going to take him pretty damn early. So you guys are just going to have to deal with it.
Nah, you're good. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't hate him by any means, but that's cheating. That's not a 2025 guy. So,
but he's wide receiver 107 on C2C's ADP right now. 107, like that is ridiculous.
I'll give the listeners one more name that they got to pay attention to as a riser. Fun player to watch, and hopefully a much more fun offense this season. It's at Tennessee, Squirrel White. Squirrel White definitely kind of now a bit overshadowed, forgotten, whatever you want to say, after not truly breaking out in the same way that was anticipated this last season. But at the end of the day, he is still an explosive threat. Certainly these undersized guys nowadays are getting some run at the NFL level. So keep your eye open for Squirrel White and a further breakout this season. If you don't consider last year a true breakout for him.
Yeah, and I have Squirrel pretty damn high. So I definitely am with you that he needs to be up there. I actually kind of skipped over him. He is behind. He's actually in the same tier as Alec, Minor. So I have them both pretty high. He's actually my wide receiver 6th in the class. So I have Squirrel very high. Like I said, I completely skipped over him.
Wow, glad we shouted out the guy. He's getting no love.
Yeah, he's not, and obviously he's tiny, but I've gotten over that. I don't care. I feel like if I've said it before, but if we feel like Nico I is going to take a step forward as far as being a better quarterback than Joe Milton this year, then we should assume that Squirrel White's going to have a better year, because he actually had a pretty good year. I think it was Dirty Mike from the Back to Devy pod. I want to say it was him, but maybe I'm mistaken. They were like looking over. They were looking over the stats and they were talking about Squirrel White. And then all of a sudden he like looked at it. He's like, wait, he had like 900 yards or whatever he had. And they're like, yeah, he had 900 yards. It's like, holy shit. I didn't realize he actually had that good of a season.
Yeah, surprisingly so. Any last guys here, or should that wrap it up? Maybe we'll have to mention some more guys for sure on the next podcast, getting into some more like C2C sleepers and guys that could go. Maybe I think this was Dirty Mike. Speaking of Dirty Mike, he had a request for us to cover guys who could go late in C2C drafts with Devy upside. So certainly can get into that very soon here.
Yeah, I'll leave the rest of my guys for that pod. I have some other ones, but that's probably pushing it for the Devy purposes. Although there is one name that I truly believe in, even though he's very unproven. But we'll get into that on the next pod. We're just past an hour and a half, so we appreciate you guys listening. We still have quite a few of you with us. And we appreciate all of the interaction and all that kind of stuff, except for Felix, of course. But everyone else, it's been a lot of fun. Aaron, do you have any words of wisdom before we get out of here?
One of these days we will get to the tight ends. I tell you, I actually made a big long list of them tonight, but again, not going to happen. So we'll have to wait another day to hear the Devy devotional truly break down tight ends in depth.
We were so close. We went just a little too long and just couldn't quite get to the tight ends this time. I actually did have a tight end on my list when I thought we were talking about C2C sleepers, but we'll get into that on the next pod. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.